Welcome back everyone. In this video I'll be going over the new iconic weapons that were newly introduced or reworked in patch 1.6. As always, I'll be discussing the pros and cons for each of the weapons and my opinion about what they add to gameplay. Overall, the iconic weapons are mostly really strong and are definitely worth picking up. Some cover up weaknesses that weapon types had before this patch, while others add brand new mechanics which are unique. Of course, I'll be discussing these unique mechanics, and as usual, everything is on the very hard difficulty. Firstly, I'll be looking at iconic melee weapons, starting with the iconic knives. In patch 1.5, throwing knives were made extremely effective at stealth gameplay and are an easy way to one-hit most enemies. However, their main weaknesses was against tankier enemies such as mechs or boss-type enemies with health bars like Cyber Psychos. However, with the addition of new knives, the rework of older knives, and poison perks, knives have become more viable against tankier enemies. Therefore, knife-only builds are more feasible than prior patches. So first of all, the Headhunter. The Headhunter is the iconic version of the new knife, the Pun Knife, and can be bought from the melee vendor in Westwind Estate. The one downside of the new iconic knives is their longer recovery time. Compared with the non-iconic version, the Pun Knife has a 2-second recovery time, as opposed to the Headhunter's 5 seconds. This makes it more punishing to miss, but its unique effect makes it insanely strong. The Headhunter's unique effect is marking an enemy on hit. If you hit a marked enemy in the head with any weapon, it'll deal 250% damage, return the Headhunter, and clear the mark. This unique ability multiplies your DPS and is extremely useful in scenarios where you lack damage or are fighting tanky enemies. Even if you are not a regular knife user, I'd highly recommend picking this up purely for the iconic ability. Next is the Blue Fang. The Blue Fang is the iconic version of the new neurotoxin knife and can be bought from the knife vendor out in the Badlands. Once again, compared to the non-iconic version, the Blue Fang has a massive 10-second recovery time after being thrown, as opposed to the neurotoxin's 4-second recovery time. The Blue Fang's iconic ability is also insane, providing an on-hit stun. Headshots stun after 1 second, while other hits stun after 3 seconds, whereas enemies outside of combat get stunned immediately. So again, this iconic ability and knife in general is geared towards tankier enemies. One thing that is true for a lot of the weapons in 1.6 is that the hardest CC is death, but when you can't one-hit enemies, that's where stuns and knockdown comes into play. The Stinger is an iconic knife that you can get from the mission I'll Fly Away. Without spoiling the mission, you can actually miss it if you progress the Aldecaldo questline too far before completing it. So make sure to grab it before the Alder camp moves to a different location. The old Stinger iconic ability was to deal additional chemical damage with a moderate chance to apply poison. This was obviously not useful with the reworked knife perks, especially one that could guarantee poison. Now, the Stinger stats have been reworked to be similar to the Blue Fang. It has a 25% chance to apply bleeding and a 25% chance to apply poison. Its new iconic ability guarantees that attacks against poison enemies apply bleeding and attacks against bleeding enemies apply poison. Unlike the other iconic knives, Stinger has no downside in comparison to its non-iconic variant, the knife, and as such is a pure upgrade. Next is the Butcher's Cleaver. This knife was previously non-iconic and is dropped by Placide during the main story. The Death and Taxes gun was previously added to Maiko's office during Judy's questline, and in a later patch was added to Judy's apartment if you missed it. I'm curious if they'll eventually do the same with this knife. The Butcher's Cleaver is the only knife that cannot be thrown, and its iconic effect greatly increases its normal attacks. The iconic effect, Bloodthirsty, increases the attacks per second and reduces stamina usage when an enemy is bleeding. This is reflected on the weapon card, increasing the attacks from 1.96 to 2.66. I had to load a save on a character that was a non-melee user, so it's probably pretty good if you spec into melee weapons and have some better bleeding chance. Overall, the new iconic knives are incredibly strong and can be combined together to destroy tougher enemies. These additions allow for knife-only builds to be more effective, and keep in mind that you can use them for normal attacking and not just throwing. This brings me to the 5th melee weapon reworked in patch 1.6, Sir Phallustiff. So obviously, I've got the nudity filter on for the YouTubes, but essentially, this weapon did not have an iconic effect and had some low stats in prior patches. As you can see from the stats, its DPS has been significantly increased, and they seemingly increased its attack speed. Its new iconic effect increases crit chance when you hit enemies in the face, and strong attacks have a chance to stun enemies. Also noted in the patch notes is that gamepads will now constantly be vibrating while holding the weapon, so have fun. Alrighty, moving on to guns. Other than the nerf to sniper rifles, AoE damage seems like a consistent theme of the additions or reworks added in patch 1.6. For the guns, I tested all of these on enemies in both the open world and enemies in Don't Fear the Reaper. Starting with sniper rifles, both the Overwatch and the Breakthrough got their stats nerfed in 1.6. Despite the nerfs, they're still capable of one-shotting enemies, but only if you invest into sniper rifles and other damage modifiers. Next, the O5 rework. So the O5 can be picked up during the Beat on the Brat Arroyo quest, and although the O5 got its stats slightly nerfed, its new iconic effect is insane. Even though it fired explosive rounds previously, it never had the massive explosion that it does now. Its iconic effect includes setting fire to enemies hit by explosions, and for each enemy set alight, you'll gain increased crit chance and reload speed. Once again, the increased crit chance can be viewed on the weapon in your inventory, and I always check these to make sure that they're working. There are of course a couple of downsides. The first downside is the full potential being unlocked at 20 body. However, as far as I'm aware, this mainly impacts recoil, which is not too bad considering its attacks per second is extremely slow at 0.26, so I consider it still usable. The next is of course hitting civilians. The AoE is quite large, making it extremely easy to hit civilians in the explosion. One final tip is that currently you don't get damaged by the explosion, meaning you can run around and fire the shot point blank, hopping from group to group. This is honestly a ridiculous way to use a sniper rifle, but it's pretty funny, so give it a go. Next, taking a look at the Hypercritical. The Hypercritical can be picked up during one of the new gigs, Concrete Cage Trap in Watson. It's the only iconic power precision rifle, and unlike the SOR-22, it cannot be equipped with a scope and has really slow attack speed. Hypercritical has explosive bullets similar to that of the old O5. If you land a shot, it knocks down enemies and has a small area of effect in comparison to the O5. The final shot will also deal critical damage, and it has incredibly slow reload speed. Overall, the Hypercritical is good if you can't one-shot enemies with a gun with better reload speed and better attack speed. In my opinion, its AoE shots are a little too small to be consistent, but maybe with more practice you can get used to it. Divided We Stand. Divided We Stand can be picked up during the side gig Stadium Love. Its iconic ability has been reworked to provide a chance of spawning chemical explosions that apply heavy poison effects, at the cost of decreased accuracy. Poison may be good with the reworked poison perks, so it's worth giving a go. Another weapon that was reworked was the Yinglong. The Yinglong crafting spec can be looted from this suspected organized crime in Wellsprings. Even though the weapon card isn't different from the patch 1.52 version, hidden stats have been improved. The chance to cause EMP explosions has been significantly increased, and the clip size has been increased to 45 for more damage. Personally, I liked using this weapon a lot, and it's really good at wiping out enemies in mid-range. One thing of note is that you can be damaged by the EMP explosions, so be sure to have some source of shock immunity, or just wait for the EMP field to expire before running through it. Finally, there's Guts. As featured in the Cyberpunk Edgerunners anime, Guts is a new iconic gun that was used by Rebecca. You can find Guts by Arasaka Tower in the city center. It's located under some bushes, but in general I just use Arasaka Tower as a reference point and go from there. Similar to the Mox, Guts is an iconic version of the Carnage. Compared to the Mox and Carnage, it has 8 shots as opposed to 5 and has slightly higher attack speed. For fun, you can even make a shotgun build using all 3. Compared to the Mox and Carnage, its spread is wider and the recoil is massive. The insane recoil actually knocks you backwards, and interestingly, this kickback can even be used to prevent fall damage. Obviously, with the insane spread and recoil, Guts can either be used to hit multiple enemies at a medium distance, or can be used pretty much like a melee weapon. I personally combo it with a Kerenzikov and fire it point blank into tankier enemies. Since it has a very slow attack speed, I wouldn't recommend using longer time slows like Sandavistans, but Kerenzikov seems pretty good. Overall, it's really fun to storm Arasaka Tower with, and I'd highly recommend it even if you don't spec into shotguns.
Come here! You...
Ultimately, most of the iconic weapons in 1.6 are good and worth trying out if you like those weapon types. In my opinion, CDPR should be commended on making all the weapons introduced or reworked in patch 1.6 unique, adding interesting ways to burn down Night City. It's exciting to see what they'll add next. Hope you found this video useful. There's plenty more topics that I want to discuss, including the Edgerunners anime, police and chase AI, and compiling undocumented changes. Consider subscribing. See you next time, Chooms.